Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very special session that we have called Diverse Voices. My name is Rodney Muradian. I'm member of the board of the International Society for Ecological Economics as president-elect. And I'm talking to you from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And I have co-organized this session jointly with my colleague, Felipe Milanés, from the Federal University of Bahia, also from here in Brazil. And we are very happy because we have here two wonderful women, two wonderful persons. Célia Tupinambá, who is from the Serra do Padeiro in the state of Bahia, Brazil, and Tamara Godard, who will talk to us from Vancouver in Canada. And so I will just very briefly explain the dynamic of this session. First, I have pre-recorded a brief introduction just to talk about the relationship between this session and ecological economics and try to draw some lessons about the issues addressed in this session. Secondly, we will broadcast a video made by Célia, who is now also with us today online. And third, we will have a live speech from Tamara, who is also with us here from Canada. And the last part of the session, we will have a joint discussion. And that would be a bilingual discussion, and because I will translate questions from English to Portuguese to Célia. And then I will try also to translate Célia's answers to the questions to English. And then, of course, Tamara will reply directly to questions addressed to her. So thank you very much again for being here with us. And lastly, I would like to thank Felipe for his wonderful support in organizing this session, and also to Mark Borton, who mediated in the relationship and getting in contact with Tamara. And also I would like to thank very much to Mariana Lacerda, Patricia Cornelius, and Pedro Marquez, who were extremely supportive in editing the video that Célia made for us. So then I'll just pass the floor to the organizers to broadcast the two videos. Welcome. I wanted to briefly introduce this important plenary session of the conference, which we have called Diverse Voices. We have given that title in order to reflect the need of the academic community to listen to other voices, to other ways of understanding and knowing the world different from Western science. More specifically, I wanted to show some connections between the subject addressed in this session and ecological economics. Our motivational question for organizing this session was, why should we listen to other voices when dealing with the sustainability of the planet? And I think that the answer to this question is evident. What we are facing nowadays is a civilizational crisis, which has been ultimately caused by our foundational cultural tenets. My personal view is that Western science has not much to contribute to solve our urgent sustainability problems. Take, for example, climate change or biodiversity loss. In order to solve these problems, where there is a high degree of academic consensus and a lot of knowledge that has been already accumulated, we don't face a lack of information or knowledge. The sources of solution for these urgent problems are elsewhere. I'm personally very skeptical of Western culture and capitalism as sources of solutions for the key problems we face today as humanity. I'm, however, optimistic about the possibility of learning from other cultures that have been more able to live in peace with their territories and non-human species. What we need is not more science, but different socio-political arrangements among us, but also between us and what we have called nature. a word that, for example, doesn't exist in cultures that do not adopt human exceptionalism. The American continent, from Canada to Argentina, can give many examples of the social, cultural, and environmental tragedies associated with the expansion of Western culture through colonialism and capitalism. Canada, for example, was the place of one of the most brutal integration policies of indigenous populations in recent history. And during the second part of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century, thousands of indigenous children were forced to go to boarding schools, loaned from their families, and in these schools they were forbidden to speak their languages or reproduce indigenous practices. Many of them suffered from horrible psychological and physical abuses. Just a few weeks ago, hundreds of new unidentified graves of indigenous children were found close to the residential schools in Canada. And many of those schools were run by the Catholic Church. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada declared this policy that affected about 150,000 children a cultural genocide. Despite the tragic consequences of forced integration, indigenous people from Canada still fight for their rights not to be annihilated, to develop a different type of economy. And Tamara Godard is going to talk about this important subject in this session. I'm very happy about that. So welcome, Tamara. And in Brazil, in spite of being historically so devastating, the cultural genocide has not been yet publicly acknowledged by the Brazilian state. And currently we have a government openly hostile to indigenous lands. Despite being a constitutional right since 1988, and many recent claims has been made, no single indigenous land has been declared by the current government. Furthermore, there is currently a law project for legalizing mining indigenous territories for discussion in the Brazilian Congress. I will focus my introductory talk on the presentation from Célia Tupinambá. More specifically, I will outline a few things, among many others, that I think we can learn from her. She will talk about the process of revitalization of the Tupinambá cloak. There are several preserved feather cloaks from South America in different European museums. And indeed, according to historical accounts, feather cloaks were among the first traded items from America to Europe in the late 16th century. Detached from their context, the clothes became commodities and exotic goods for wealthy collectors, aristocrats in Europe. And that's the reason why several of them have survived in museums, in European museums. Celia will show us some of these pieces that are still in relatively good shape in some European museums. So Celia decided to revitalize the Tupinambá cloak after she visited an ancient cloak from the 16th century, preserved in the Museum of Quai Branly in Paris. She will tell us the story of the cloak and the story that the cloak told her. It is a rich, beautiful, and interesting story. I think that the story of the cloak can teach us lessons along three dimensions that are very relevant for the sustainability for performance of the economic process, which are also key words in this conference and ecological economics. Namely, knowledge, wealth, and property rights. And then I will elaborate a bit more on these three dimensions. The first thing we can learn is that the beauty and sophistication is about the beauty and sophistication of other ways of transmitting knowledge. The way we learn and transmit knowledge can tell us a lot about the way we are and we behave in the world. In cultures with a strong oral tradition, as most indigenous people in the Americas, the main way of transmitting knowledge is through telling stories. Stories that can be dreamed or can be told by a living entity or by what you call an object. The Tupinambá cloak tells a story that I hope that by the end of this session you will be more able to understand. The power of the cloak to transmit information and knowledge is so strong that its voice could be heard by Célia about 400 years later. By interpreting the way different ancient cloaks were made, Célia could re-establish ways of relating to her territory. This was done through a learning process that involved the whole community in order to rescue, redevelop, adapt, and transmit cultural practices that ultimately have to do with the way of interacting with and being in the territory. One of the main things we can learn from the Tupinambás is that they are the territory. They are the territory not in a metaphorical way. The cloak is made of the territory, literally. There will be no feathers without birds, no birds without forest, no forest without land. In the same way, the Tupinambás exist only if the territory, their territory, exists. Their fight for the territory is therefore an existential fight, an ontological fight. Our emotional, physical, and historical attachment for land is at the core of the global sustainability crisis. The opposite of a territory is a shopping mall, all exactly the same at any place in the world. The cloak is a representation of the Tupinambás territory. The shopping mall is the ultimate representation of our way of life. The cloak represents the territory in a very sophisticated way. Its constitutive materials come from several plant and animal species, including about a dozen domestic and wild bird species. The cloak has feathers from birds that inhabit different layers of the forest, from the ground up to the top of the canopy. They also represent different levels along the trophic chain. The presence of different forest layers and the forest density depends on the level of deforestation and the type of land use practices adopted. That's an ecological fact we know well from the academic literature. Therefore, several of the species that compose the cloak could be considered as indicators of ecosystem health and integrity of the Atlantic forest, where the Tupinambá territory is located. So these figures, for example, were done with data from the south of the Bahia state, where the Tupinambá territory is located. And they show the relationship between bird species and abundance, bird species abundance and riches and forest cover, which can be considered as a proxy of ecosystem integrity. Therefore, bird richness and abundance reflect ecosystem health. In sum, the cloak embodies very sophisticated ecological knowledge, and it represents the level of ecological integrity of the territory. It is worth to remember that more than 70% of the regional cover of the Brazilian Atlantic forest has been already lost. This ecosystem has about 800 bird species, 120 of which are considered threatened or near threatened. Another remarkable feature of the cloak is, as an instrument of knowledge transmission, is that it combines thinking and doing, beauty, semiotics, and science, materiality and immateriality in a way that is extremely difficult or impossible to achieve in the Western academy. The second thing we can learn has to do with the way societies define wealth, a key issue for ecological economics. Ultimately, wealth is a social convention in combination with the condition of the physical environment and the capacity to transform it. Celia will tell us about the abundance of the Tupinambá's territory, achieved after many years of fights against large landholders and the Brazilian state. Abundant fishes, freshwater shrimps, jaguars, man sloth are unevident symbols of wealth for the Tupinambás. The cloak represents wealth, not only due to its exuberant beauty, but also because it represents the abundance of a healthy ecosystem. The type of fight for the territory Celia will talk about has been wrongly named environmentalism of the poor by some political ecologists and ecological economists. Fortunately, more recently, the much more appropriate word defenders has been adopted to correct the initial bias. The discourse of the Brazilian government conceives indigenous people as poor people living above a very rich subsoil full of minerals waiting to be exploited, or as poor people that hinder economic development by means of maintaining land idle, while it could be covered by large-scale monocrops. This is the official discourse of the current Brazilian government. The story Celia tells us is quite the opposite. Actually, the Tupinambá people fight to remain wealthy. They see themselves as wealthy people, and they will remain wealthy as far as the territory remains healthy. The last learning point I wanted to mention has to do with the property rights and governance structures. The way Tupinambá communities organize the territory is an example of a decentralized and cooperative governance, deeply anarchic in scope, in the sense that it is against the colonial state, but extremely effective in creating wealth and maintaining the integrity, continuity of the territory. Such form of social organization, so common among indigenous population in the Americas, is increasingly rare and threatened by the expansion of global capitalism. The opposite to a Tupinambá territory is a soybean plantation, whose area in Brazil, as large as the whole size of Germany, is still increasing. I wanted to finish my introduction by a quotation that came across when preparing this session in a publication of Aimé Bono, one of the few specialists in ancient feather clothes from South America. She cites Jean Delery, a French author that published a voyage book about Brazil in 1578. In that book, he talks about the voice, about the sound of a small gray bird from the Atlantic forest. And he said, his voice is so penetrating, even more pitiful than a screech owl, that our poor Tupinambá, who heard him cry more often in the night than in the daytime, have the fantasy imprinted in their brain that their deceased relatives and friends are sending them these birds as a sign of good luck, especially to encourage them to bear themselves valiantly in war against their enemies. They believe firmly that if they observe what is signified to them by these augurs, not only will they vanquish their enemies in this world, but what is more, when they die, their souls will not fail to rejoin their ancestors behind the mountains and dance with them. Of course, in his European arrogance, Jean Delery was the one who was wrong. The Tupinambás were not deceived, precisely because they kept listening to the voices of the encantados, the voices of their ancestral and supernatural entities, because they kept listening to the voices of the birds from the forest. Their culture and at least part of their territory are still alive today. So thank you very much for coming to this session. I'm pretty sure that you will enjoy it.
Para o manto existir, né, é necessário que exista também o território, por conta de tudo que a gente precisa utilizar da natureza, né, extrair da natureza, para poder confeccionar o manto. Não é só o manto pelo manto, né, o manto pela arte, mas precisa de um território. Então, foi em 2004, praticamente, que a gente pisou na terra, né, que iniciamos as retomadas. A gente veio fazendo o levantamento, observando a quantidade de desmatamento que estava grande na nossa região, e ela é uma região muito pé de serra, tem muito nascente, e o pessoal estava desmatando, então se desmatar aqui, então seca todos os nascentes, seca a água, e a região é muito frágil, então não tem como ninguém sobreviver aqui. Então é meio complicado, e a gente toda a vida nasceu, morou, viveu, cresceu no pé da serra, a gente nunca foi de outro lugar, sempre daqui do pé da serra. E então, e a perseguição a nós é de muito tempo, né? Então, em 2004, isso é mais marcante porque eu acreditava na justiça do homem, né? Então, a gente fez um levantamento, fizemos todos os levantamentos de violação ao meio ambiente. Então, filmamos, fotografamos, colhemos depoimento e impetramos, né, um processo na justiça para parar o desmatamento, né? O desmatamento, a caçada ilegal, a jogada de veneno no rio. E aí a gente entrou na justiça e a justiça deu praticamente nada, né? Isso aí para a gente foi uma afronta, né? Que como é que pode ser uma coisa dessa, né? Que a gente estava denunciando, falando do que estava acontecendo e ninguém não deu ouvido para a gente, né? Aí nós e fizemos a nossa primeira retomada. Nós resolvemos pisar o pé na terra e botamos todo mundo para correr. Pegamos nossas burdunas, se pintamos de genipapo, menino. Foi uma coisa muito bonita. Ave Maria, pense. E aí juntou jovens, mulheres. Então nós temos que ver se é o tamanho da nossa coragem, se nós temos coragem ou não. Então nós mesmos testando nós mesmos, né? E aí fizemos a nossa primeira retomada. E com isso, o fazendeiro entrou na justiça com um processo contra a gente de reintegração de posse. E aí a gente nós fomos todo mundo pintado, trajado, gordura, com maracá, fazendo aquele toré bonito, que estremecia tudo lá no judiciário lá. Aí o juiz começou a conversar e aí ele falou bem assim, que como é que essas coisas, porque ele, no júri dele não é favorável a indígena. Então, que aquele júri ali não era favorável a indígena, desde já, queria deixar isso bem claro. E se a gente quisesse fazer qualquer coisa, que a gente fosse recorrer a Brasília. Mas ali naquele júri a gente nunca ia ganhar, a gente nunca ia ter vez. Naquele momento eu vi que a justiça tinha um outro lado e que não era o nosso. E ela tinha uma formalidade, né? Tinha uma opinião própria. E aí a gente voltamos para casa, tristes, né? E como é que a gente ia dar condições de como é que a gente ia fazer a luta? Como é que a gente ia garantir o território se o judiciário era contra a gente, tudo que a gente estava fazendo, que a gente estava defendendo, de tudo aquilo que a gente acreditava. E que a gente tinha uma Constituição, que a gente tinha um direito, né, que nos defendia. Então, como é que seria aquilo? Aí a gente, no redor do fogo do toré, sentou para discutir os mais velhos, falar como foi a reunião, o que aconteceu, né? Fazer o relato, a avaliação do dia. E aí os mais velhos falaram para a gente que o juiz tinha o direito de negar, que era o lugar dele, né? Ele tinha o direito de negar. E nós tínhamos o direito de resistir, né? Era essas duas balanças. Ele tinha o direito de negar, ele é dado o direito a ele, mas nós também tínhamos o direito de fazer a resistência, de resistir e dizer para ele que estava errado e nós não. Porque era nós que ia ficar sem água para beber, eram os animais que estavam escorraçados sem poder ter os seus filhotes, sem poder dormir, sem poder ter uma paz dentro do território, que estava sendo agredido direto, que o pessoal usava para vir fazer caçada, né, esportiva e tudo mais, e a gente não tinha um controle de dentro do território. Aí trouxe a mídia, mostrou a Santa Cruz, aí os fazendeiros fizeram protesto, aí veio o Ministério Público para cá, averigou, aí foi que deu favorável para a gente, segurou, né, o processo, e a gente recorreu em Brasília, que segurou, e aí até saiu o processo do estudo. Então daí até o dia de hoje foi luta mesmo, daquela bem... Mas hoje, quando eu olho para trás dessa luta, eu sinto tão feliz, porque hoje a gente está vendo onça, a gente tem 5 espécies de onça, e isso o jovem vê. Hoje as meninas, 2 meninas viram as onças, né, as panteras, passar de um lado para outro da estrada, de uma mata para outra. Né? Hoje a gente tem mais de 50, 60 nascentes de rio recuperado, né, porque a gente deixou a mata crescer. Hoje você chegar aqui, você vê a preguiça de coleira descer da árvore, descer para o chão, depois atravessar e ir para o outro lado, subir para outro gravatar mais alto ainda. Isso, para mim, é a melhor luta, gratificante. Quando chega agora a chuva das águas, que vem o trovão, as trovoadas, e aí as piaba, e vai ter que fazer a piracema, né? E aí pulando, assim, que cai até no meio da estrada, e é a coisa mais linda. E os meninos vão para lá para pegar a piaba, que vai e come, vai pegar o camarão, vai pegar o pitu. Então, e tem o que comer no rio. Para mim, isso é o melhor resultado daquela iniciativa, daquele conselho que os mais velhos deu para a gente diante do fogo. Então, para te apresentar o território Tupinambá, quem são os Tupinambás da Serra do Padeiro, porque o território ele é grande, né? É grande assim, tem 23 comunidades, cada uma são autônoma, tem a sua forma de organização, tem suas lideranças, seus caciques, suas organizações sociais de como administrar, uma não interfere na outra, a não ser numa questão no âmbito do território, que é um único, né? Que é conjunto, é um território contínuo. Então, o que interfere nessa questão aí a gente, todo mundo faz esse levante. E Tupinambá, da Serra do Padeiro, é marrento, né? Não negociamos, não vendemos, não abrimos mão dessa terra, desse território, porque é um território sagrado, é a morada dos encantados, e ele tem esse valor para a gente que não é imensurável, né? Não tem como dizer o quanto que esse território é importante para a gente, e a gente precisa dele para muitas coisas, né? Porque é a nossa relação entre o mundo terreno e o mundo espiritual, então faz parte junto com esse território. Então cuidar dele é cuidar desses 2 universos. Eu acredito muito na cultura e eu tinha essa vontade de revitalizar. Eu queria presentear os encantados com o manto. Foi o primeiro manto que eu fiz, através de visualizar uma imagem, né? Uma foto. E isso aí durou um tempo, de 2006 até 2018, eu ir na França, ver o manto pessoalmente. E o manto... Eu falei, olha a imagem que eu vi do manto quando estava lá na reserva Quebra-Ali. O mesmo gestual, a mulher, né, fazendo o manto, sentada e com cordão no pé e a tala na mão fazendo, né? E eu falei assim, todas as imagens veio fazendo aquele quebra-cabeça, veio fazendo, se somando, né? E aí eu vejo que o manto realmente falou comigo. Não é uma fantasia minha que eu pensava assim, será que eu estou delirando? Será que eu estou louca? Mas não, realmente o manto falou comigo e essas imagens vêm se concretizando no real. Quando você vai ver o manto, você vai ver um manto de vida. E um manto que traz a luta do território, a vida do território. Um manto precisa que o território viva. E se o território vive, o manto vive. Então, a gente teve que fazer essa luta para recuperar o nascente, recuperar os animais, recuperar as aves, recuperar tudo isso depois de mais de 15 anos de luta, muito mais de 15 anos de luta, né? De busca pelo manto, né? Que hoje tem um manto, existe um manto, né? Não existe aquele manto sem vida ou sem movimento, mas o manto está com vida e com movimento. Isso que é o mais, eu acho que belo do manto, o que o manto traz. O território, até então, não foi dada, né, essa regularização do território, mas para a gente garante ela com nossas vidas, né? A gente faz essa defesa do território com nossas vidas. Correndo um risco de vida, a gente vive ameaçado, a gente está no programa de proteção, né? A gente, mais do dia, tem planos arquitetados para dizimar e matar as lideranças dentro da comunidade. Então, é muito difícil se manter no território vivo e garantir a luta do território e fazer a luta. Porque a gente tá vivo por conta dos encantados, por conta do milagre, porque se fosse por conta do poder que existe do outro lado, do inimigo, a gente já foi aniquilado há muito tempo.
O processo do manto antigo sobre esse manto atual. Existe uma semelhança, pois ele é baseado numa pesquisa que foi através desse contato com o manto da reserva Quebra-Ali e através de algumas fotografias. Eu consegui chegar na reserva Quebra-Ali através de Nathalie Pavelic e eu vi ele pessoalmente, o manto falou comigo. Então essa relação que eu e o manto estabeleceu, isso veio com a condição de eu poder fazer essa revitalização. Então, ao perceber que no manto existia uma fibra de algodão e que ela tinha sido trabalhada com cera de abelha, as penas, a exposição das asas, observar o capuz do manto. Então, vários elementos que eu não tinha conhecimento, passei a ter através desse manto, dessa leitura desse manto, pessoalmente. E, posterior, eu tive uma aula com o professor Augustin, uma apresentação, um trabalho na UFSB com vários outros alunos pescadores que estavam discutindo a questão da trama, a malha dos mantos. Então, fui apresentado nesse momento 11 mantos tupinambás, que eu não conhecia. E desses mantos, o que mais me chamou a atenção foi o manto que está na Basileia. E ele dá uma condição melhor de ver os pontos, que ele está em forma de losango, e dá para ver como é passada a linha. Essa técnica, né, muito interessante, o qual a gente tem aqui dentro da comunidade. Tudo isso deu um subsídio maior para mim poder fazer essa revitalização. Então, aprendemos novas técnicas fazendo essa leitura do corpo, né, do fazer, do toque, das mãos, até do fuso, que é necessário, o fuso para o enceramento da linha, passar para o outro lado, para a gente fazer, pessoas que utilizam agulhas para poder fazer melhor o ponto, né? Eu utilizo a leitura do corpo, eu uso o corpo para fazer esse resgate, essa revitalização dos pontos. Então é necessário todo esse conhecimento junto à comunidade. Esse resgate não faz só a pessoa, só na pessoa Célia, não. Faz-se com toda a comunidade, desde as crianças aos mais velhos. Todos estão envolvidos nessa nova roupagem para o manto, que traz uma nova cor, né? Que traz a cor da natureza, a cor da terra. Então, tudo isso é levado em consideração a luta que nós, povos indígenas, lutamos para a questão do território. O cacique irá usar o manto, mas ele também deixa claro, quando o manto fala comigo, que ele foi feito por mão de mulheres. São mulheres que detêm o saber de tecer o manto. Também traz consigo o nome das mulheres que usavam o manto, que eram as magés. Então é um enriquecimento no processo de uma revitalização do manto para uma comunidade muito importante e significativo, não só para a gente humano, mas também para os não humanos, porque o manto é um presente do céu para a terra, que são portados por pajés e por magés. Então, descrever toda essa ligação entre o manto que está no museu e o manto que está em movimento, então ele é bem significativo, porque o manto, trazer o manto à vida, a estar em movimento, fazer essa revitalização dos rituais, então isso é muito importante para nós povos indígenas, de fazer essa revitalização do fazer do manto, do tecer o manto. Não é só o manto em si, né? Mas tem toda uma leitura do corpo, do gestual, da natureza, de todo ele estar em harmonia com tudo isso. Então não é de qualquer jeito que se faz um manto. Ele vem através de um saber que ele vai o conduzindo, o manto nos conduz, né? Ele vai direcionando, que são através dos sonhos, são através das pessoas que vão sendo atrelado a essa trama. Então a gente agradece cada pessoa que chegam nessa trama e contribuem com a luta do povo Tupinambá. Muito agradecido. Cueca tu reté.
Well, thank you very much, Celia, for this impressive presentation, wonderful video. And now I want to give the floor to Tamara Godard. I also wanted to thank her because she has been passing through difficult times during the last week, and but she, even that, despite that, she accepted our invitation. So we are very grateful to you, Tamara, for being here. And well, Tamara is the CEO for Our Future, which is an organization devoted to support Indigenous communities in Canada, and she's a very active leader in the Indigenous movement of Canada. So the floor is yours, Tamara.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today, Tansi. I'm happy to be here today. It has been a difficult time in Canada the last month or so. And so I do want to acknowledge what's going on in Canada in terms of the bodies of our babies that are being found. And I also want to acknowledge that we are having a lot of deaths in our community across Canada right now. And that's very relevant to talking about Indigenous economics. And we're seen around the world as the rights that we carry. We are doing well. But I guess today we're going to learn how we're leveraging our rights and how we're still affected by colonization. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm on the territory of the Squamish First Nation, the traditional territories, and Chief Gibby Jacob is actually one of our shareholders and my mentor. And I want to acknowledge, and I don't know if everybody knows, but we've started exploring the schools, the Catholic schools that held our children upon colonization. And our people have now come up with ground penetrating radar. And historically, you know, they thought that maybe 4,000 children died at the residential schools. And we are in the process now of finding mass graves across Canada. So it's just a difficult time for all of our families. And so we've so far found 1,000 children of our ancestors buried, and we are now in the process of bringing them home. So we are in a time of great grieving, but we are also in a time of great healing. And then with COVID and now with climate change and the heat coming up, there are many, many deaths in our community, which is a testament to the poverty situations, not being able to have food security, nobody has air conditioning, and the health of our community members is very low. So their hearts with the grieving, with climate change, not having access to foods is still a very real threat in Canada. So with that, I'm going to just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm going to share my screen. And I love the last story. 10 years ago, I participated with the Sechelt First Nation. And when we did this project, it was called Weaving with the Ancestors. Sorry, I can't see where my view slide show from the start. There we go. So I wanted to acknowledge the story about the cloak because we've experienced this many times in our communities. And one of these was to bring weaving back to the Sechelt Nation. So we had looms built for the Sechelt Nation and brought elders in from a neighboring community. They were able to reteach Sechelt Nation their weaving, which they had lost. And once the community members started weaving, they began hearing their ancestors guiding them. And what they were being guided to do was to recreate the patterns. So each family has certain patterns that they would weave into their cloaks. And so every student reported that their ancestors were in fact instructing them as to what their traditional patterning was. And that was not taught to them except for through the weaving. So I just wanted to give testament to that story. Thank you for sharing that. For Our Future was formed because in Canada, although we have many, many rights, when it comes to sitting at the negotiation tables with governments and with nations and corporations and industry, often our priorities were not at the table. And at the end of the day, sitting there as an Indigenous person in these negotiations, what would happen is we just began talking about money and what could possibly be paid to us for the taking of our lands and our resources. So we did this for many years, and many rights were won over the last 30 years. But it still wasn't making its way to the boardroom table. And the reason for that is because there was no lens for Indigenous economics, for land pillars or people pillars at these tables. We were forced to negotiate in a Western regime, as opposed to being able to stand in our own cultures. So we came together as Indigenous, I will call us thought leaders. We are from 4 of the largest territories in British Columbia. There are 600 Indigenous communities in Canada. The collective experience of us, our shareholders, is about 100 years in negotiations and legal land claims and partnership and economics. So we came together and asked the question, we didn't want to, we are always influxed by industry and government and universities and corporations coming to us, and they have about 50 people on their team, and we usually have 1 lands person in our communities, and we're not able to keep up. And so we're forced, in order to defend our territories, we're forced with all of our capacity and resources to fight oil and gas, to fight pipelines, to fight mining, all of the time. And, with a 50% success rate when we're not successful simply because we don't have the capacity or funds to fight things in court, or we don't have the rights to be able to do so. So we asked the question that for our future, having made recommendations to 100 government departments, Indigenous governments in Canada, and at the negotiations table, we didn't see a lot of action happen. We wanted to put the focus, instead of reacting to resource heavy industries, we wanted to put the attention on Indigenous economy and what was important to us and what would build our economies, as we put it, for 7 generations in the future, and also acknowledging the 7 generations of our ancestors historically. We wanted to look at green technologies. We wanted to look at ways of restoring our lands. And so we asked the question, how can we leverage our Indigenous powers of legal rights and title to establish a healthy future for all people in Canada, but for our people as well. So in Canada, because of our rights and our many more than 200 case wins, this is what we sort of come up with. We have one that we have 80% title in Canada to the lands, 80%, and 60% rights. So 60% of the land we have rights on. So industry now, and just so you're aware, we've used those rights and title to, in one province, in just British Columbia, we have delayed or canceled $80 billion worth of projects. So there's a big transition in Canada to green tech. We are moving as fast as possible. We believed that if we embraced green technology and embraced new software technologies, that we could utilize technology to build a sustainable future together. And to do that, we needed to solve some of the major problems. And those 2 major problems, to boil it down, are regulatory oppression, regulatory systems of oppression, so that's systemic racism. And then the second one was access to capital. So those are the 2 ways that, even though we're very powerful people in Canada, the systems continue to hold us down. We cannot access the dollars to make investments to become sovereign people. And that is what For Our Future works on. What we do have that is attractive to businesses that are balanced with the ecological systems is we have bargaining power. We can go straight to government. We can utilize our lands. We have first access to Crown lands as well. We also have people. We have access to training dollars. We're heavily invested into training centers. So we have local people that, if it's the right industry, we will train and we will co-own and we will work with something like a vertical greenhouse system, food security, land security. And then we have the title, and then we have the rights to the land. So given that we've stymied $80 billion worth of projects, the title and rights to the land is an extremely important piece to being able to choose what industry comes into our territory and how we will behave in relationship for the long term. We see ourselves as a bridge to reconciliation because of our ability to bring forward, an Indigenous long-term lens, along with our knowledge with the regulatory system, bodies, government systems, and industry. This is a very simple lens that we've brought forward. We focus on 4 aspects of land wellness and 4 aspects of people wellness, and we will not work on a project if it does not have these considerations. Food security and any technology that will support it, power security, and any technology that will support it, housing security, water security. So those are the aspects that keep our lands healthy and has us co-owning in green and new technology that will increase our access to clean water, power, housing, and food. And our model goes further to that, where it allows our Indigenous peoples to invest as partners in ownership of these resources on our land. The people pillars are the culture, our culture, everybody's culture. So that's 600 various cultures in Canada. Education, careers, not digging ditches, but actual careers in the management of the businesses on our territories, and capacity. Capacity we interpret that to be localized market. So if you have new industry in the territories, we are looking at medicine people and our artists, and what is the local economy? How does that look with small business and service providers? And how are our medicine people and artists taken care of? So that's local market. We work with the people pillars in every single project we do by bringing massive amounts of dollars for education, setting up training, and we do customized training. So the customized training means that we will do drone workshops so that our people can learn to become drone operators, whereby they are surveying their own lands and all industry on their territories. And from that, we go back to the storage and where are we, how are we analyzing the data from the environment on our territories. We need that information in Canada for legal purposes, and we need it to plan for our lands. Careers, we're looking at laddering strategies. Many of our communities do not have access to universities, nor do they want to leave their territory to get education. So we bring education to our communities. We work with the nation to develop their economic vision and then go backwards from there and ensure that the entire community is trained to participate in their vision of the future. And then we utilize that as a third government in Canada to negotiate our way forward. But first we have the vision. Our capacity. So we do strong support of education and resources and financing for entrepreneurs at the local level. And again, that is largely tourism, cultural keepers, teachers, educators. We want to have a healthy, what more would have reflected our communities prior to colonization, which is a healthy trade system amongst ourselves and then other nations. Culture. We ensure that every single project feeds back into supporting the cultural revitalization of each community through set-asides. We essentially set aside money and raise funds to restore things like our traditional longhouses, roundhouses, places of ceremony, and keep them protected. With the food security. With these, what we do for our future is we establish and vet green technologies to ensure that it's a real technology and that it's worthy of investment. So we currently have partnerships. We look at vertical agriculture, aquaponics, agroforestry. How do we distribute food? How do we have entrepreneurs distribute food? And what does international trade look like in the area of food security? And how does Canada's trade agreements facilitate these business relationships around the world with other Indigenous communities? Power security, we look at the lands, that's geothermal, solar, hydrokinetics, green fuels, distribution. How can we partner with, invest in, and foster green futures? And same with water security. And same with housing security. We are always looking for off-grid. We are looking to use hemp instead of wood. We want our Indigenous communities to be the ones to be able to invest in green technology. Green technology is often suppressed, especially in Canada, probably around the world. So we are a wealthy people in Canada, and we want to work with the other oppression. So the green technologies are oppressed and we are oppressed. We have money, they need it. How do we invest in and own new technologies moving forward? So we work directly with First Nations communities, but we also work with 98 federal government departments. We also work with the global trade, global affairs. And we also work with the Indigenous governments across Canada. What we essentially are, I guess, is we're the planners. We're the ones that bring everything into how it should fit together. And mostly, even if we work for a corporation or government, we tell them that we primarily work always for the First Nation. So no matter where the money is coming from, we always work for our Indigenous peoples. One of the areas that's of key importance for the Western economic system is understanding the financial situation, investments, etc. So we have a lot of financial oppression. So we've developed, for example, partners where we need partners, and one of them is to come in and do financial management strategies and growth strategies for our nations. And further to that, we train them to manage their own finances. So we train them as their own team to understand and manage, so that there's no third party that's telling them something that they don't understand. Our technology partners so far include vertical greenhouse systems, and I almost want to say that Afinor has a vertical greenhouse in Brazil, actually. So it's food systems, and we're working with Quest Water, and we continue to bring on new technologies as they come about. We are setting up training in vertical greenhouse systems because we cannot bring them to our communities if we cannot train people how to do vertical agriculture. And then we are also looking at the purchase of a nursery, and that nursery grows traditional plants for restoration purposes. So we're actually looking to expand our assets and become the growers of our traditional plants and for restoration in Canada. And our leadership, of course, is negotiating. So one of the projects that we're looking at is that 1 trillion trees will be planted in Canada. So we form partnerships ourselves, and then we go after that contract, and then we form and invest in partnerships with every nation that we can, so that they are also participating in the financial reward and the restoration efforts. Our goal is to unite at this time. We are currently also working on a National Indigenous Supply Institute. And this is very, very important because this project has us looking at, data sovereignty. Right now, Indigenous people in Canada are the most researched in Canada. Millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars go into making sure that we are kept in check because of what we could do, because we tend to win in court most of the time. So what we are looking to do is to engage software applications to connect 50,000 Indigenous businesses on a communications platform. We've negotiated that we will retain 5% of all government spend in terms of contracting, and then that will come down to the BC government's industry and corporations and major projects. So we are looking at machine learning, and then we are looking to host and store our own data and bring value to what our data is so that we can forecast economic and environmental impacts and socioeconomic improvements. And then as leadership organizations, we will be able to see what our people need across Canada. We will be able to communicate with each other. We will be able to bring reliable green technology forward and best practices in negotiations and land retention. So that's the end of this slideshow. I feel like that was kind of a lot of information. I don't know, trying to think of anything else of key importance. We are also looking into for the financial oppression. I call it financial oppression. What the government has done with us is given us access to funds that does not allow us to use it in a way that has us profit in any way. So therefore we can have affordable housing, but we can't actually support ourselves. So the government makes us sign a 50-year agreement to continue providing financial support instead of us being able to build local economies. So we're at interesting times in Canada. We are coming together as leadership organizations across Canada. We are engaging the best technology to bring us together and leverage our rights and our title to a prosperous future. And I think of other key importance is we've looked at the 14 trade agreements in Canada. And this is very important because the 14 trade agreements are one of the only areas in government where there is no limitation on what they call an Indigenous or minority set aside. And so what that means is we can work directly with global affairs to create contracts that would reach internationally. And so we will be working with those trade agreements to see how we can work with other Indigenous peoples around the world. Because while we do need rights, legal definition and the implementation of Indigenous law takes time. And while that is taking its time, what we can do is Indigenous economics. We can rebuild each other, we can invest in each other, we can buy from each other. And in many cases, I ask the question, can I hold a mine in Canada responsible for their actions in another country on another territory? That is something I would like to explore more. Legally, that would be difficult to do, but in terms of negotiation with money, that can happen very, very quickly, especially if there's partnerships internationally. And especially if our communities are able to earn monies and have investment dollars and be able to be sovereign in the current economic system. So that's what I have for you today. I want to thank you for allowing me to be here today and listening to my stories, and much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tamara, for that such a wonderful presentation. And we can see also the commonalities and differences between Brazil and Canada. There are many common challenges. So now we have our own challenges. That's how to deal with 2 languages here. And then we will open the floor for questions, both for Tamara and for Célia. So you can write down your comments or questions in the chat. And then my colleague, Felipe Milanés, will translate some of the questions to Célia. And of course, to Tamara, you can write directly in English, please. I see that there are already some comments for you, Tamara, if you want to.
I'm looking, but I don't see them on the side chat. Am I looking in the wrong place?
If you click the link that the organization has sent at the beginning of the chat.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just looking in the chat. Got you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm just I gotta cover you up to see the comments. Well, I want to thank Christy at Willa Bay for the acknowledgement for our residential school survivors. We do expect to find quite a few. I think just by my quick math calculation, the number, the government said there was about 4,000 children who died. And if we keep going at this pace, there will be over 100,000 children found in the next year. So it's a very interesting time. And it's contributing to people's overwhelming support right now from at least the corporate and government management side for us to be able to come in. It's like people in Canada are waking up. And so we're trying to stay strong and use this sort of wake up call as an opportunity to bring economic resources to our communities. And then there's a big cry in Canada as well for the land, not just from our people, thankfully now, but from more people. And so we are definitely leveraging that as well. The financial, the capitalist, that's a great question. So, and, I'm going to speak in terms of prophecy a little bit here as well. We were informed, our company, our shareholders, this economy is cracking and falling all over the place. The implementation of Indigenous economy is something that we can accomplish once so the connecting of our Indigenous businesses across Canada, 50,000 of us and 100 Aboriginal owned capital corporations. We do our own investing now. Once we're joined together, we will be able to implement our own trade systems. And that is sort of the second step. We are also interested in keeping very abreast of alternate currencies. So there's alternate currencies in trade. We are establishing this in Canada. I think that we're probably becoming leaders in what technology exists and how we can bring that together. And once that's done, and we're already working internationally, but there's an immediate need to bring these trade structures international. And we would need to collectively decide. We don't believe that money is the bottom line for our future. We believe that relationship is the bottom line. So we always understand we need to react in a relational manner to our lands and each other and all our relations in order to have a 7-generation future. Oftentimes, because we exist in a Western paradigm, we're talking about profits. When those monies come into the Indigenous community, you see them get shared in our traditional way. So we actually are functioning on a different math. So currently the economic system is growing on a straight, sort of in a linear fashion. I actually like machine learning and quantum computing in future because it allows us to look at a 3-dimensional aspect of how the economy is running. And that is the math of nature. And that is your Fibonacci spiral, which grows exponentially stronger than a linear model.
Thanks, Tamara. There is another question about your relationship with Indigenous peoples in other parts of the world, and whether are you supporting other communities outside Canada or not?
We're speaking, we just are speaking on panels, and that's through the trade programs. So that's the APEC communities and with the Supply Institute in Australia and with the Maori. So it's something that's coming, but we also know, and we caution that we have to do this well in Canada before we launch to the rest of the world. So I will add, though, that my mother does work internationally at Dr. Val Napoleon. And I like that because where she is, I think they have 10 satellite offices and one is in Peru. So when you see the court cases being won, that's sort of your first step in establishing economy as your law. And what she does is very special as the professor at the University of Victoria, is she works with Indigenous peoples to understand their traditional culture and stories and is able to translate that into law in a way that it's recognizable in the current and modern court systems.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for Célia. Maybe you can translate, Felipe. My question is about what is the current situation of the territory, of the Tupinambá territory? What's the current legal status, and what kind of court results are you expecting in the next years or so? And the second question is about the effect of the pandemic on your community. What has been the main effects of the pandemic in the Tupinambá community?
I just translated to Célia, and she will speak now. Pode falar, Célia.
Ok. Tá. Então, a situação do território Tupinambá hoje, ela se encontra na FUNAI, por conta que os governantes hoje do governo atual que estava, o ministro da Justiça, que era Sérgio Moro, ele devolveu 17 terras indígenas que estavam no processo de andamento para assinar apreciação e assinatura do presidente, né? Ele devolveu 17 áreas, 17 terras indígenas para a FUNAI. E até hoje não devolveu, sendo que... Continua ou... Dá conta?
I will just translate that. Well, in Bolsonaro government, there have been some reorganization in the policies. I mean, in the organs of the state dealing with indigenous affairs, and so and there has been basically a dismantling of the organizations dealing with indigenous affairs as well as environmental policies. So, and then, well, she's saying that there were, before the Bolsonaro government, there were 17 processes for the declaration of new indigenous lands, and all these processes have been stopped. Pode continuar.
No caso, é processo que é ilegal, porque a nossa terra foi julgada no STF em 2016 e ganhamos de 16-0. E foi a orientação do Supremo foi que pudesse assinar a terra imediatamente. Aí hoje todas as terras indígenas hoje se encontram numa situação muito delicada por conta da questão que eles querem voltar ao marco temporal e a PL 490, né, que quer tirar o direito aos povos indígenas, principalmente o artigo 231, 238 da Constituição, principalmente a parte que diz o uso exclusivo dos povos indígenas, né, sobre a terra.
So the main threat that she sees is the law project 490, which aims to withdraw constitutional rights from indigenous people, including allowing, for example, mining in indigenous territories. Not only mining, but also for example, large-scale monocrop development in indigenous territories.
Sorry, I'm not sure who the question was. Was that directed towards myself or?
Yeah, maybe you can. There are a couple of questions for you, Tamara. Maybe in the chat you can.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to read and listen to you at the same time.
Yeah,
so
it's difficult.
I just sort of, I was reading and you were speaking and I missed it. I missed something.
Yeah. So maybe you can check it. There are a couple of questions for you about low carbon.
Yes, the low carbon, we are actually looking at blockchain technology for both procurement as well as carbon monitoring, carbon offsets and carbon credits. So always the concern is that, you know, what happens is industry and government gives us their research and it takes us, and they give us thousands of pages. We would like to have a voice with carbon offsets and carbon credits in Canada, and Indigenous people would like to invest in the software to monitor. We are also, you know, one of our projects is actually to building a $2 billion off-grid community. And so these are some of the really interesting projects. So we're negotiating with Crown for 500 acres, and the community will co-own a subdivision that is off-grid. We'll have food security, power security, and even all emergency services. And they will earn enough monies from that subdivision to continue to restore and protect the sensitive areas of their land forever. And so that's a negotiation, and that's one of the rare times we're working. We worked with the developer and negotiated that deal for the nation before they approached.
Thank you, Tamara. So, Felipe, there are a couple of questions for Celia. Maybe you can choose one or two.
Yes, I'm translating to them. Hold on. You can make the questions in English. I'm speaking in Portuguese to Celia, and she will.
Okay, but which question are you?
from Stefania Barca. Célia, can you please tell us about your work with indigenous women and about your experience with UN Women? Then, do you think, Célia, international support and alliances with other indigenous people can help the Tupinambá people to reconquest and occupy their original territory? And last one, so she can answer in the group. Degrowth or no growth represents from Christian Neves. Degrowth or no growth represents a great wealth to my community too. But not everyone in my community is aware of this. There is resistance to the message of limits to growth. What's your tips for getting everyone involved? Yeah, Célia.
So while he's translating, maybe you can answer another question, Tamara. Sorry for this mess about translating.
Oh no, it's no problem.
Yeah, she will. I think I just made the
yeah, okay. Thank you. There are three questions, so it's Pode falar, Célia, tem que abrir o microfone.
Tá, abri. Então, durante a pandemia, né, a gente conseguiu dentro da comunidade perceber mais a organização melhor das mulheres. E isso gerou também uma questão econômica importante, que a gente não tinha se atido a isso, né? Comente a produção da matéria-prima da mandioca, a gente aumentou a questão dos viveiros, dos tipos de variedade de mandioca. E também a gente trabalhou na questão da confecção de máscara, né? Que foi distribuído para várias comunidades indígenas, além de dentro do território, mas também como para outras comunidades indígenas e não indígenas, né? Com grupo de assentados, né? Da reforma agrária, então a gente atendeu a todo esse público. Tá conta?
Yeah. Well, she said that, well, somehow paradoxically, the pandemic strengthened the women organization within the community because it allowed them to carry out a couple of new activities, like, for example, development of new varieties of cassava, and also to invest in local agriculture, and as well in manufacturing, like making masks to sell to other communities, not only internally but also to sell to other communities. So she's saying that she's talking about the opportunities that rose in the middle of the terrible situation that was the pandemic.
E temos muitas mulheres militantes do movimento indígena que defendem, que saem denunciando as violações do nosso território. E também a gente tem um trabalho muito compartilhado dentro da comunidade, né, que são os trabalhos coletivos, né, que não é questão de pagar de dinheiro, né, de troca, não. A gente junta um grupo de mulheres e vai ajudar outras mulheres na produção de roças, né, dos fazeres. Então, todo mundo faz essa rotatividade de ajudar um ao outro. Então, isso gera uma questão muito assim de carinho com a outra, né, das mulheres, e potencializar elas, né, desde a criação de hortas de ervas medicinais, de hortaliça, a criação de galinhas, né, dos quintais, né, produtivos, né. Isso está sendo assim uma experiência assim maravilhosa dentro da comunidade e que eram feitas naturalmente e as pessoas não tinham ainda essa percepção, né, do que essa economia é importante dentro da comunidade, porque se for tirar tudo para comprar, então não tinha como as comunidades indígenas darem certo. Mas eu vou parar por aqui, senão eu continuo descendo a ladeira.
Obrigado. She's saying that women are very active, both, I mean, like in the political fight, so they are in the front, but as well, they are extremely active internally in terms of building self-help groups that deals with administration of money and financial resources, but also in supporting productive activity, and especially horticultural gardens that are helping them to be self-sufficient in terms of food production and consumption. So maybe Tamara, you have picked some questions you can answer as well.
I liked the question, and I put my mother's name in chat. Somebody had asked, and so it's there. There we go. I like this question. How do you find hope and stay strong in the climate of despair? I do want to answer that because it I've been taught by Indigenous leaders more than Western and more than universities. And so essentially my ancestors, what they lived through and everything that they fought for while they were living in that despair and being taken from their homes. And I was not raised by my community. I didn't get to go home until I was 19. These are part of the tactics in Canada. So one, we are a community of people, and we have mentors and elders, and the elders have taught me and held me and told me I'm here only to do my part. So I'm not to pay attention to what I cannot do. I'm only to pay attention to what I can do. And I stay in ceremony. I practice my culture. We laugh and we support each other. I think that I'm very, very lucky. I think that despite the pain and some of the hardships that we have, our people choose to remain as sovereign as we can be, and have faith in the future that we're building together. And the big key aspect of remaining strong is together. We're just here historically to do our part, and currently to do our part, and to be inspired by those who came before us. And I think that's how we stay strong.
Sorry that there are some dogs barking here in my back. So maybe you can, there were other questions for Célia as well. Felipe, you can, I don't know, there were a couple of them. So.
Célia, agora tu pode comentar essas outras questões que eu te fiz a tradução também.
Então, a gente, junto às organizações internacionais, a gente faz as denúncias, o qual é o que mantém as lideranças da nossa comunidade viva, né? Se dá uma condição para a gente estar lutando com o território, para garantir o território, porque o território ainda não é oficializadamente demarcado com os trâmites legais que pede, né, as leis, mas é demarcado pela nossa luta e a nossa coragem, né? Que a gente fizemos nossa autodemarcação. Então, e com a parceria, como eu estava no espaço da ONU Mulher, como multiplicadoras, né, junto às mulheres da nossa região, e estava em contato com outras indígenas que também passam pela mesma situação do nosso território. Então, é uma luta constante, né? E principalmente para as mulheres. A questão para as mulheres, a questão territorial é muito mais forte, é muito mais, a gente sente mais, né, o impacto. Então, quando a gente faz a retomada, tem reintegração de posse, e que é tirada as famílias, as mulheres, as crianças da localidade, que é destruída toda a plantação. Então, isso é um impacto muito grande para uma comunidade, não só também psicológica. Realmente, as ações que a Polícia Federal fez dentro do território, com arma apontando na cabeça das crianças. Então, a gente tem uma história de vida muito forte, e se não fosse as parcerias com as organizações internacionais, talvez a gente não existia sobre essa terra mais, né? Então, a gente agradece muito as parcerias, ao pessoal das universidades, aos professores, então, que abre esse espaço, que a gente consegue estar denunciando, usando esse espaço de divulgação sobre a luta Tupinambá. Obrigada. Okay.
Well, I will try to translate briefly. She said that, well, first of all, that for women, the territory is extremely important. First of all, because when they suffer violence, for example, from the police or from ranchers, that's affect very directly children and the constitution of their families. And secondly, she said that the partnerships are extremely important, and they have been extremely important for their fight, especially partnership with international organizations like the UN, where she could meet many other women in similar situations and many other leaders fighting for their land. And also partnership with universities, NGOs, and other organizations that have supported them in the fight. So we have 5 minutes left. So unfortunately, there is no time for many more questions. Just wanted maybe to give the floor both to Tamara and Celia for last words. Well, I want just to thank you very much again. For me, it has been a very happy learning experience to meet you. So maybe Tamara, you're going to say some final words.
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here today. These conversations are important. I don't get to speak outside of my negotiation tables very much. So, you know, we're really at the point of really doing the work. These things aren't going to happen by themselves, and it's a tremendous amount of work. So, so the opportunity to come that your organization is providing is important, because otherwise I don't think we would get the chance to be in forums like this and to meet other Indigenous leaders from around the world. So I want to thank you today for having us and for listening and for learning and for your support that I see for some of the challenges that our people are having up here in Canada. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Então, você tem a última palavra, Célia, se você quer falar alguma coisa para encerrar. You have the last word, Célia. Muito obrigado de novo por ter assistido, por ter vindo aqui, por ter feito vídeo. Thanking her for, because she did this video especially for this session. It's wonderful. She invested a lot of time and efforts doing it. Então, se você quer falar alguma coisa, encerrar a sessão.
Então, eu que agradeço ao nosso Pai Tupã, os encantados, que botar pessoas que nem você no nosso caminho e conhecer outros parentes de outros lugares, né? Compartilhar a mesma sensação, né? De a gente estar lutando para um bem melhor, para o meio ambiente, para a natureza, né? A gente está lutando não só o que a gente está fazendo pelo nosso território, a gente está fazendo para a humanidade, para o mundo, né? E que a gente tem um outro olhar, outra maneira de ver a natureza, de ver o mundo e de se relacionar com outras pessoas, né? Então a gente agradece. Eu tenho só que agradecer a vocês por estar abrindo esse espaço e falar um pouco da minha luta, da comunidade, o qual eu faço parte e como eu me relaciono, né? Como a gente trabalha economicamente, como a gente se relaciona com outros parentes, né? Quando a gente lida dentro da comunidade. A gente tem isso por conta do território. E a gente tem essas parcerias junto às pessoas que acreditam no nosso sonho, né? Acreditam na nossa forma de vida e de viver. Então, muito obrigado. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, she said that she thanks everybody, and she's very happy to have the opportunity to meet Tamara and other Indigenous people that faced similar challenges and similar problems. And yeah, she said that she's fighting not only for her territory, but also for having a different way of being in the world and a different way of relating to people. And I think that's the wonderful message to close this session. So thank you very much also for all the support stuff. Thank you, Felipe. Muito obrigado. And I think, well, we can close now this session. Thanks a lot to all of you in the audience who came here to listen to this wonderful session. Okay.